Hey, how you doing today? I am Tequila Coleman. In today's video, I'm going to talk about can your prodigal spouse forfeit the promise? So this is something else that's been circulating. There's some people who saying the prodigals they can forfeit their promise. I believe something differently because God gave me a whole different revelation around if a prodigal can lose their forfeit the promise or not. Okay, so let's start with the definition for forfeit. Forfeit means to lose or give up something on account of an offense, error, or failure to fulfill an agreement, right? So when we talk about can prodigals forfeit their promise, I don't think they can. And let's just start, okay? I'm gonna just show you. I'm gonna pull out a couple of people in the Bible. We're gonna talk about these individuals. Take a look at how they didn't forfeit their promise, right? But it is something that prodigal can forfeit, okay? And we're going to talk about that. So, when you take a look at the prodigal son, okay, in the Bible, this is found in the book of Luke, chapter 15, starting at verse 11. When you read about the prodigal son, okay, he separated himself from his father. He left. He asked his father for his inheritance. He was out. He was off in wild, reckless living, right? And he wasn't spending his money, his resources, wisely, and so there was a point of time where he began to lose everything and he became in need, right? And so as he began to lose everything, because that is what a prodigal can, they prodigals will lose everything, okay? But that doesn't mean the promise, okay? um Let me clarify this. When I say prodigals will lose everything, this is everything. This is when they walked away from the Lord, right? So prodigals will lose all these women, all these counterfeits that they, find themselves with. Counterfeits, I mean, prodigals will also lose, their money, that they were just splurging, not really paying attention to their money, not really budgeting or even saving their money, right? They're just spending it recklessly because prodigals have a mind of no understanding. That is their curse. Okay. And so there came a time when as the prodigal son was out and he lost everything, he came back to his senses and he said, wait a minute. He basically was saying, I'm gonna paraphrase, he basically was thinking to himself, I had it better at home with my father. And then he started making plans on returning back home to his father, right? And you could continue to read the story. So, long story short, he returned back home to his father. He was repentant. He was like, Father, I'm unworthy to be called your son. And his father, which represents God, he embraced him, welcomed him back home with open arms. So this story is your guide, okay, that's telling you prodigals cannot forfeit their promise. They will lose their money, okay, because they operated with a mind of no understanding. They are often wild, reckless living. Just splurging and spending their money. Just on women, alcohol. Whatever, okay, or whatever prodigals love to spend their money on. So they will lose their money, they will lose time, okay. um they would lose, family and friends, okay, because of how it all goes back to their mindset. Because again, they very prideful, and the Bible say pride goes before destruction, and that's another thing that's built in. Because when prodigals choose their pride, what they are not aware of is you choose your pride, destruction is right behind you. So this is again why in the prodigal son story, he lost everything. Okay. That was his payment for choosing his pride and walking away from his father. Okay. So we see in the prodigal son story, he returned. He came back into his senses and he returned back to his father. And when he returned back to his father, everything was restored to him. So he did not forfeit his promise. Now, let's take a look at Saul. When Saul was persecuting God's children, God could have allowed Saul to forfeit his promise, but because it tells us in the book of Acts, chapter 9, verse 15, that Saul, because God said this, he said, Saul is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles, okay, and their kings and before the people of Israel. So Saul was chosen by God. And even though he was persecuting God's children, God encountered him. He gave him a face-to-face encounter. It was like, why are you persecuting me, Saul? You know, and then he blinded him and put him on a 3-day dry fast, right? And then that's when the conversion happened, where God converted him into Paul, right? So again, we see that he did not forfeit his promise. Now, when you take a look at Jonah was running from his calling. We have a lot of prodigals who are running from their calling. Jonah was running from it because he knew that if they if I think he was going to Nineveh, if he knew if Nineveh would repent, God would have mercy on them, right? And so Jonah was like, you know what? No, I'm not doing it. So God provided a well. Again, if God didn't care about Jonah forfeiting his promise, he would have never provided the well. Okay, he provided that well. Jonah was inside that well for 3 days before it vomited him out. Okay, and he was back on, in alignment with God, fulfilling the calling that's on his life. Okay, Peter, he disowned Jesus. He basically told people, I don't know Jesus. I'm not a disciple. I'm not a follower of Jesus. And he did this out of fear because he feared man. He saw how they was crucifying Jesus, and he feared that if he was to speak up and say he's a follower, they was going to crucify him. So he just completely disowned him, right? But we also see in the book of 1 Peter and 2 Peter that he's referred to as an apostle of Jesus Christ. So again, he didn't forfeit his promise, okay? Because I can't remember which book it was. It could have been Luke or Mark or John, one of them, where Jesus reinstated Peter. He asked him 3 times, like, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. He asked him this question 3 times. So that was like restoration, he was doing with Peter, okay? Another one is Jacob. Let's talk about Jacob, because he was a deceiver, but he also got deceived, right? So he was in love with Rachel. And, I think it was Rachel's dad. Yeah. He tricked Jacob, and gave Jacob Leah to marry, and then told Jacob, well, if you want my second daughter, you got to work for me an extra 7 more years. So basically Jacob put in 14 years just to get Rachel. Okay. And again, he didn't forfeit his promise. Okay. He just had to put in more time. Okay. He had to put in a little bit more effort to get the promise that was on his life. So I don't believe, this is just my belief, I don't believe prodigals can forfeit their promise, because God knows how to humble prodigals in their pride. God, if it comes to it, he will strip prodigals of everything until they bow at the name of Jesus Christ. Okay. Now let's talk about what prodigals can and will lose. Okay. We find this in the book of Matthew. Let me turn over here. And we find this in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verse 14, where it talks about the parable of the talents. Okay. So it's basically a story where it's talking about how, let me read it. Okay. So there were 3 men, I'm just paraphrasing here. There were 3 men, and one of the men was given 5 talents, the other one 2 talents, and the other one 1 talent, right? The talents represent, what God, has entrusted in our care. Okay. So for everyone, all of God's children, we have a calling on our life. We have purpose on the inside of us. Jeremiah 29:11 say, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. So God already put the plan. He put the purpose already in you when you were born. Okay. It's up to us. It is our responsibility to discover what is the purpose or the calling that is on my life. And then once I discover it, now I got to work that purpose. I got to master that purpose, right? I got to begin to birth the purpose. Okay. So as I was reading about the parable of the talents, the one with the 5 talents, he doubled it, and the man was like, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." He was happy to hear that. And the one with the 2 talents, he doubled it as well. But the one with the 1 talent, he buried the talent, right? He buried the talent, and let me find it. It say, but the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master money. Now, I need you to understand, because he buried his talent, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of prodigals who are burying their talent with counterfeits. We have a lot of prodigals who are fearful of their calling, their purpose, and so they doing everything else but the thing that God is calling them to do. And what they don't understand, because when you're a prodigal, you are operating with a mind of no understanding. So what they are not understanding is that when you bury your purpose, when you allow fear to keep you from stepping into your purpose, and when God, had that face-to-face encounter with you and say, okay, so what are you doing with what I put on the inside of you, right? What are you doing with the people I entrusted in your care? Because some of these prodigals, that maybe they have already stepped in purpose, but yet because they are prodigal and they, often is in this prodigal lifestyle, and they being distracted by these counterfeit, they might be neglecting God's, children, his sheep, right? When I stepped into this God ordained marriage, God been guiding me all the way. He was the one who told me to put up the prayer request. Then he told me, I heard the word, feed my sheep, right? I knew exactly what God was telling me. So for me to ignore it and do something else, I'm neglecting the talent, right? And so what prodigals can lose is the talent God placed on the inside of them, right? And God would do exactly what he did with this one with the 1 talent. He took it away from him and gave it to I think it was the one with the 5 talents. Let me check. I believe I can't really find it. Let me just find this right quick. Yeah, it say take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. So he gave it to the one who had 10 talents, right? Because the one with the 10 and the one with the 4 talents, they show God that he can trust them with, with the gift, with the talents, with the people, with everything that God has put in their care, right? So they show God, like, you can trust me with it. You see how I just multiplied it. You see how I'm working my purpose. You see how I'm feeding your sheep, God, right? So God is like, okay. So he took that 1 talent from the man who had the 1 talent and gave it to the one with the 10 talents, right? And so this is what prodigals can lose. They can lose their calling or assignment that's on their life, okay? Because they are not caring for it. Whatever you don't care for, God gonna take it away from you. God put us, before God elevate you, he want to see how are you managing what I already given to you. He gave you an apartment, but you want a house. Okay, show God how you can manage that apartment. Are you cleaning it up? Are you taking care of it? Or is the house just messy, right? Because God is looking at that. You want a car. Okay, how are you taking care of the car you have? Do you get an oil change? Are you keeping it fixed up, right? So God is looking to see if you take care of this, then I know I can trust you with more, right? And so prodigals can, like I said, they can lose their talents. They can lose, their influence. They can lose, their fame, their status. They can lose, the assignment that's on their life. And God would take that calling and give it to someone else and tell them, go ahead and implement that idea I just gave you. This is why you may have had an idea a couple of years ago that you was procrastinating on, or maybe you allow fear to hold you back from like, implementing on taking action on this idea, but then 2 or 5 years later, here's someone else. You see someone else already coming out with the same idea that you had years ago. That is because God took it from you and he gave the idea to someone else and they took action on it. So prodigals, I don't believe that they can forfeit their promise, but they can lose their talents. They can lose, okay, their influence. They can lose money. They can lose, their status. They can lose their assignment that's on their life, okay? If they choose to allow counterfeit to keep them distracted, or if they continue to allow fear to prevent them from stepping fully into their purpose, okay? So, and I like to say this, on the other side is fear. On the other side of fear is everything you always desired. Fear is false. The Bible tells us, I didn't give you a spirit of fear, right? All throughout the Bible, God is telling us, do not fear, be strong and courageous, right? So, like I said, I don't believe your prodigal spouse can forfeit the promise, because, like I said, God knows exactly how to humble your spouse. He will strip them of everything until they bow. Okay, they will come back to their senses. They will come back into their right mind. They will begin to think to themselves, you know what? When I was walking with the Lord, I had it good. When I was with her or him, my spouse, I had it great. It was very peaceful there. I think I'm about to go back home, and they will return back home. But they can lose, like I said, their talents, their calling, that assignment. I don't want to say calling, but it could be an assignment God placed on their life for them to fulfill or start now. But again, because they are being distracted by the enemy, God said, you know what? Because these assignments has an appointed time. When you allow the enemy to keep you distracted from your calling, that also means there's people attached to this calling. So if you are allowing the enemy to keep you distracted or to keep you in fear, people's lives are, attached to this calling. So that means people can't receive their healing because you're distracted, or people are losing their life because you're fearful. So God is like, well, no, I'm about to go ahead and take this from you and give it to someone else who's ready to implement this idea. And then I'm going to go ahead and let them reap from it. Okay. So that's what I wanted to share with you on, can your prodigal spouse forfeit the promise? This is just my thoughts, my belief. Let me know what you believe down in the comment section. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you all real soon. Take care.